The knife pressed cold against her throat the moment she stepped off the plane, and Zara knew three things instantly. Her father had sold her, the man holding the blade wasn't here to negotiate, and the tattoo snaking up his neck marked him as someone who'd never hear her scream.
Your father's debt is now yours, and Min-jae does not do refunds.
If you think you know how this ends, hit subscribe because you're about to be wrong about everything. The black sedan's leather seats smelled like expensive cologne and old violence. Zara's hands wouldn't stop shaking as the city lights of Seoul blurred past the tinted windows, her mind racing through every decision that had led her here. The scholarship to Yonsei University had seemed like a miracle 6 months ago. Her father's enthusiasm about her studying abroad had felt like pride, but now she understood it had been relief. The desperate gratitude of a gambling addict who'd found one last chip to throw on the table. You're quieter than the last one, the driver said, his eyes finding hers in the rearview mirror. His face was a roadmap of scars, each one probably a story she didn't want to hear. Min-jae appreciates that. The last girl wouldn't stop crying. Made things messy. What happened to her? Zara's voice came out stronger than she felt, her Nigerian accent thick with fear she couldn't quite swallow. You'll find out if you don't cooperate. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had probably been the last thing too many people had seen. We're here. The building didn't look like a den of criminals. It was sleek, modern, all glass and steel reaching toward the Seoul sky like it had every right to be there. The lobby had marble floors that clicked under her sneakers, abstract art that probably cost more than her father's debt, and a receptionist who didn't even blink when two armed men escorted a terrified African girl to the private elevator. The penthouse office was exactly what she'd expect from someone who traded in human misery. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, furniture that whispered old money and new violence, and behind a desk that could have doubled as a small car sat Kim Min-jae. He was younger than she'd expected. Maybe 35, with the kind of face that belonged in a corporate boardroom or a fashion magazine, not at the head of a crime syndicate. His suit probably cost more than her entire education, tailored perfectly to shoulders that had definitely done their share of brutality. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, dark and calculating, measuring her worth like she was livestock at auction. Zara Okonkwo. He said her name like he was tasting it, deciding if he liked the flavor. 23 years old, biochemistry major, 3.9 GPA, never been arrested, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Virgin. He paused on that last word, let it hang in the air between them like a price tag. Your father assured me of that last part. I hope for both your sakes he wasn't lying. I don't understand what's happening. It was a lie. She understood perfectly. She just needed to hear him say it, needed the reality to be spoken aloud so her mind would stop trying to find exits that didn't exist. Min-jae stood, and even that simple movement carried threat. He walked around the desk with the grace of a predator who'd never known what it felt like to be prey, stopping close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. Your father borrowed 3 million won from my organization last year. He promised to pay it back within 6 months. That was 18 months ago. He reached out and Zara flinched, but he only lifted a strand of her braided hair, examining it like it was something rare. The interest has been accumulating. He now owes me 8 million won, and unfortunately, his construction business went bankrupt 3 weeks ago. He has no assets, no collateral, nothing of value. His eyes met hers. Except you. I'm not something to be sold. The words came out hot, angry. Everything her mother had taught her about respecting elders and keeping her head down in dangerous situations evaporating in the face of this obscene transaction. No, Min-jae's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Then walk out. I'll have your father's body delivered to your mother by tomorrow morning. Your 2 younger sisters. He shrugged. I know some clubs in Itaewon that pay well for exotic girls. They'll work off the debt eventually. Might take 15, 20 years. The room tilted. Zara grabbed the edge of his desk to keep from falling, her vision tunneling as the choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Her father had gambled away everything, and now she was supposed to pay for his weakness with her body, or her family would pay with their lives. "What do you want from me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Min-jae returned to his chair, pulling out a contract that looked like it had been drafted by lawyers who understood exactly how to make hell legal. 6 months. You'll live here, in this building. You'll be available to me whenever I require. You'll follow every instruction I give without question or hesitation. In exchange, your father's debt will be forgiven, and your family will be placed under my protection, which in Seoul means they'll be safer than they've ever been. Available to you. Zara forced herself to look at him. You mean sex? Among other things. He slid the contract across the desk. I have business dinners that require a companion who's educated and can hold a conversation. I have rivals who need to see that I possess things they cannot have. And yes, I have needs that a virgin from a good family can fulfill in ways the usual prostitutes and club girls cannot. He leaned back. Your innocence has value, Miss Okonkwo. I'm offering you the chance to trade it for something more valuable than keeping it ever would have given you. This is human trafficking. She was shaking again, but this time with rage. This is rape. This is business, Min-jae corrected, his voice never rising, never showing anything but that terrible calm. And if you sign that contract, it becomes consensual. You'll have a safe word. You'll have limits we'll negotiate. You'll have luxury most people never experience and protection from every threat in this city except me. He tapped the contract. Or you can walk out, and I'll make sure your father understands exactly what his gambling addiction cost his family before I end him. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Zara's hand trembled as he picked it up, her mind screaming at her to run, to fight, to do anything except surrender like this. But her mother's face appeared in her memory, her sister's laughter, and she knew there was no real choice here, just the illusion of one. The safe word she managed. What is it? Lagos. Min-jae's expression didn't change. Say it, and whatever's happening stops immediately. Break any other rule, and there will be consequences. But that word is absolute. She signed. Each letter of her name felt like a betrayal of everything she'd been raised to believe about her worth, her future, her body. When she finished, Min-jae took the contract, added his own signature with a flourish that suggested he'd done this before, and pressed a button on his desk. Hannah will show you to your room, he said as a woman entered, middle-aged and professional-looking, her expression carefully neutral. You'll find everything you need there. Dinner is at 8. I expect you dressed appropriately. Wait. Zara stood, her legs somehow still working despite feeling like water. You said, I'll be gentle, I promise, in the message you sent my father. Min-jae's smile was the cruelest thing she'd ever seen. I lied. The room they'd prepared for her was obscene in its luxury. A bed big enough for 5 people with sheets that felt like silk against her trembling fingers, a bathroom with a tub that could have been a small pool, a closet already filled with dresses in her exact size, all of them expensive, all of them chosen to display rather than conceal. There was a vanity with makeup she didn't know how to use and jewelry that probably cost more than her father's debt. Zara sat on the edge of the bed and didn't cry. Crying felt like giving him something else, another piece of her dignity he could own. Instead, she pulled out her phone, saw 17 missed calls from her father, and turned it off. Whatever he had to say, whatever excuses or apologies he'd manufactured, she couldn't hear them right now without screaming. A knock on the door. Hannah entered without waiting for permission, carrying a garment bag. Mr. Kim has selected your outfit for dinner. You have 2 hours to prepare. I'll help with your hair and makeup. Does he do this often? Zara asked as Hannah unzipped the bag, revealing a dress that was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, deep red silk that would cling to every curve she had. By women. Hannah's hands paused for just a moment. Mr. Kim's personal life is not my concern, and it shouldn't be yours either. Your concern should be pleasing him. Everything else is a distraction that will only cause you pain. That's not an answer. In this building, Miss Okonkwo, the absence of an answer is the only answer you'll get about things that don't concern you. Hannah laid the dress on the bed. The shoes are in the closet, 3rd shelf. Mr. Kim prefers minimal jewelry for first dinners. And he despises tardiness more than almost anything else. The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation that felt like being packaged for delivery. Hannah was efficient and impersonal, transforming Zara's natural beauty into something that belonged in Min-jae's world of expensive things and dangerous people. The dress fit perfectly, which meant he'd studied her body enough to know her exact measurements before ever meeting her. The thought made her skin crawl. "Remember," Hannah said as she applied the final touch of lipstick, a shade of red that matched the dress. "Tonight is about observation. Mr. Kim will be evaluating you, determining what kind of training you'll need. Answer his questions honestly. Lying to him is the fastest way to make your 6 months feel like 6 years." Dinner was served in a private dining room that overlooked the glittering expanse of Seoul at night. Min-jae was already seated when she entered, his suit jacket removed, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with more tattoos, dragons and demons and things she didn't recognize. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of politeness that felt obscene given the circumstances. "Beautiful," he said, and it wasn't a compliment, just an observation of a fact. "Sit." The food was Korean, dishes she'd tried to learn about before coming to Seoul, but had never actually tasted. Min-jae watched her struggle with the chopsticks for a moment before speaking. "Tell me about your family." It felt like a trap, but Hannah had said honesty was required. "My mother is a nurse. My father was a construction manager before he destroyed that. My sisters are twins, 14 years old, they want to be doctors. And you want to be a biochemist." Min-jae sipped his wine. "Why?" "I wanted to develop affordable medications for communities that pharmaceutical companies ignore because there's no profit in saving poor people." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "I wanted to matter. Make a difference. You still can." He set down his glass. "This contract doesn't end your education. You'll continue your studies at Yonsei. I'll ensure you have everything you need to succeed. My only requirement is that when I need you, you come. No questions, no delays." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You could have anyone. Women who would choose this, who want the money and the luxury and the protection. Why buy someone who hates you?" Min-jae's laugh was unexpected, genuine in a way that made him seem almost human. "Because the women who choose this want something from me beyond the transaction. They want to change me, save me, make me fall in love with them, and leave this life. It's tedious." He leaned forward. "You hate me. That's honest. That's pure. You'll never confuse what we have with affection, which means you'll never disappoint me by expecting things I cannot give. You're insane. I'm practical." He stood, walking around the table until he was behind her chair. Zara felt every muscle in her body tense as his hands settled on her shoulders, warm through the thin silk. "You want to know what happens now? You want me to clarify the terms of your sexual availability, explain what acts will be required, when, and how often?" "Yes." Her voice barely functioned. "Not tonight." His hands slid down her arms, not aggressive but possessive, claiming territory. "Tonight, you'll finish dinner. Then you'll return to your room. You'll sleep in that obscenely comfortable bed, and you'll wonder what tomorrow brings. The anticipation is part of the transaction, Zara. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that at any moment I could decide to collect what I've purchased." He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "I own you for 6 months. Every second of that time is mine to use as I see fit. Remember that when you're lying in the dark wondering when I'll come for you." He left her there alone with a table full of food she could no longer taste and a view of a city that had become her prison. Zara made it back to her room before the tears came, hot and furious and useless. She'd traded herself for her family's safety, signed away 6 months of her life to a man who collected people like others collected art, and there was no rescue coming because she'd agreed to every word of it. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Sleep well, Miss Okonkwo. Tomorrow, your education begins." She didn't sleep. How could she when every sound in the hallway might be him coming to claim what he'd bought, when every shadow might hide the moment her virginity stopped being hers to keep? The bed was comfortable enough to be cruel, mocking her with luxury while she waited for violation. But he didn't come. Dawn broke over Seoul, painting the Han River in shades of gold and pink, and Zara was still alone, still untouched, still terrified. The anticipation he'd mentioned wasn't just part of the transaction, it was a weapon, and he was wielding it with the skill of someone who understood that fear of pain could be worse than pain itself. A knock at 7 a.m. Hannah entered with breakfast and an itinerary that made Zara's stomach drop. Mr. Kim has arranged for a medical examination at 9. Dr. Park is discreet and thorough. After that, you have a session with Ms. Chin, who will instruct you in appropriate behavior and expectations. Lunch at 1 with Mr. Kim, followed by your first Korean language lesson. Mr. Kim expects fluency within 3 months. The medical examination, Zara forced herself to ask. What's it for? Hannah's expression remained professionally neutral. To verify the terms of your contract and ensure you're healthy enough for Mr. Kim's requirements. Dr. Park has been doing this for 15 years. She's seen everything. My advice is to cooperate fully and avoid making it more uncomfortable than necessary. E-doctor's office was in the building, 3 floors down, sterile and cold and equipped like a hospital. Dr. Park was a woman in her 50s with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd learned to disconnect clinical examination from human empathy. The verification of virginity was exactly as humiliating as Zara had feared, a physical confirmation of her value in this transaction that left her feeling like livestock being certified for sale. You're healthy, Dr. Park announced after an examination that had violated every boundary Zara had ever had. No diseases, no conditions that would complicate Mr. Kim's use of you. I'm prescribing birth control, which you'll start immediately. Mr. Kim doesn't want complications. What if I refuse? Zara asked, already knowing the answer. Then you'll be in breach of contract, and Mr. Kim will exercise his remedies. Dr. Park handed her a prescription bottle. Take 1 every morning. I'll be monitoring your compliance. Ms. Chen's session was worse in different ways. The woman was elegant, probably 60, with the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime teaching girls how to be acceptable to powerful men. She walked Zara through posture, conversation, the subtle art of being decorative and desirable without being threatening or tedious. Mr. Kim is not like other men you may have known, Ms. Chen explained, circling Zara like a sculptor examining flawed marble. He has no patience for giggling or false modesty. He expects intelligence, but not challenge, beauty, but not vanity, submission, but not weakness. You'll learn to read his moods, anticipate his needs before he voices them, and most importantly, you'll learn that your pleasure in these 6 months comes entirely from pleasing him. And if I can't do that? Zara's hands were fists at her sides. If I can't become whatever twisted fantasy he's bought me to be? Ms. Chen's smile was pitying. Then you'll suffer and your contract will still run its full term. Mr. Kim doesn't release his acquisitions early for poor performance. He simply makes the consequences of that performance very clear. Lunch with Min-jae was in the same dining room, but this time she wasn't alone with him. 3 other men sat at the table, all Korean, all wearing the same expensive suits and dangerous eyes that marked them as part of his world. They discussed business in rapid Korean she couldn't follow, occasionally glancing at her like she was a new painting he'd hung on the wall, worth noting but not addressing. Gentlemen, Min-jae said in English, his hand settling possessively on Zara's thigh under the table. This is Zara. She'll be accompanying me to various functions over the next 6 months. I expect you to treat her with the respect due to my property. Property. The word landed like a slap, but Zara kept her expression neutral, remembering Ms. Chen's lessons about not showing weakness. One of the men, older than the others with gray at his temples, smiled in a way that made her skin crawl. African, he observed in heavily accented English. Exotic choice, Min-jae. Will you be sharing? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Min-jae's hand tightened on Zara's thigh, hard enough to bruise. No, the single word carried enough threat to make the older man physically lean back. Anyone who touches what belongs to me forfeits their hands first, then their life. Are we clear? Crystal. The man raised his hands in surrender. My apologies. No disrespect intended. After they left, Min-jae turned to Zara, his expression unreadable. You handled that well. Didn't flinch, didn't show fear, Didn't try to appeal to them for rescue. Good. What would you have done if I had? She needed to know where the boundaries were, what rules governed this nightmare she was trapped in. Punished you. He said it simply, like he was explaining the weather. I don't expect you to enjoy your circumstances, Zara. I expect you to accept them. There's a difference. Enjoyment would be a pleasant bonus, but acceptance is mandatory. He stood, pulling her up with him. It's time. Her heart stopped. Time for what? For me to collect what I purchased. His smile was sharp, predatory. Don't worry. I did promise to be gentle. He paused. Oh wait, no I didn't. I promised your father I would be. I made no such promise to you. The walk to his bedroom felt like a march to execution. Zara's mind raced through options, none of them viable. She could fight, but he was stronger and trained. She could use her safe word, but for what? Postponing the inevitable would only make the anticipation worse. She could try to dissociate, separate her mind from her body, but something told her Min-jae would notice and make sure she stayed present for every second. His bedroom was masculine and minimalist, dominated by a massive bed that faced windows overlooking the city. He locked the door behind them, the click of the mechanism somehow louder than it should have been. Undress, he commanded, removing his own jacket and tie with practiced efficiency. Slowly. I want to see every moment of what I've bought. Zara's hands shook as she reached for the zipper of her dress. Pride warred with survival instinct, but survival won. The red silk pulled at her feet, leaving her in the lingerie Hannah had selected, black lace that revealed more than it concealed. All of it. Min-jae was watching her with the focused intensity of a predator studying prey, his eyes cataloging every curve, every imperfection, every sign of her mounting fear. When she stood naked before him, every instinct screaming at her to cover herself, to run, to do anything except submit to this, Min-jae circled her slowly. His fingers traced her shoulder, down her spine, mapping territory he now owned. Nervous? Terrified, she admitted, because Hannah had said honesty was required. Good. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. Fear sharpens experience. Makes everything more vivid. His hand cupped her face, almost gentle if you ignored the steel in his grip. I'm going to hurt you tonight, Zara. Not because I'm cruel, though I am. Not because I enjoy your pain, though I do. But because your virginity has value to me specifically because taking it will cost you something. If it were easy, if it were gentle, if you could simply endure and move on, then what would I have really purchased? You're a monster. The words escaped before she could stop them. Yes, he agreed easily. And you belong to me now. Remember your safe word. Lagos. Use it and this stops. But know that if you use it tonight, the anticipation starts again. Tomorrow I'll bring you back here. The next day. The next. Until you're so desperate to get it over with that you'll beg me to take what you're too afraid to give. His thumb brushed her lower lip. Choose now. Endure tonight, or postpone and suffer the waiting. It was a choice that wasn't a choice, a demonstration of control wrapped in the illusion of her agency. Zara lifted her chin, meeting his eyes even though everything in her wanted to look away. Do it. Get it over with. That's my girl, Min-jae murmured, and then his mouth was on hers, claiming her first kiss with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to everything else. What happened next was everything she'd feared and worse, because he made sure she felt every second of it. Min-jae wasn't violent in the way of fists and force, he was violent in the way of precision, targeting every vulnerability, every boundary, systematically destroying her innocence while ensuring she remained conscious and aware of every moment. When he finally took her virginity, the pain was sharp and immediate, but it was the psychological violation that cut deeper. The knowledge that this act she'd imagined saving for love, or at least choice, had been bought like groceries and consumed with the same casual ownership. Afterward, as she lay in his bed trying not to cry because tears felt like giving him more than he'd already taken, Min-jae pulled her against his chest. The gesture was almost tender if you ignored the context. You didn't use your safe word, he observed, his voice carrying something that might have been approval. Would you have respected it? She needed to know if even that small mercy was real. Yes. His answer was immediate, firm. I'm many things, Zara, but I keep my word. Always. If you'd said Lagos, I would have stopped immediately. His fingers traced patterns on her shoulder, almost soothing. The fact that you didn't tells me you're stronger than you think you are. That will serve you well in the months ahead. Is it always going to be like this? Her voice was small, broken in ways she'd never been before. No, Min-jae shifted, making her look at him. In the dim light from the city below, his face was softer, less predatory. Tonight was about establishing ownership, making clear the terms of our arrangement. Going forward, it will be different. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but always on my terms. He stood, pulling on a robe. Stay here tonight. Sleep. Tomorrow, your real education begins. He left her in his bed, alone with aches both physical and emotional, and Zara finally let the tears come. But even as she cried, part of her mind was calculating, planning, surviving. 6 months. 180 days. 4,320 hours. She could endure anything for a finite period of time, and when it was over, her family would be safe and she would be free. She just had to survive until then. But survival, she was beginning to understand, wasn't just about enduring. It was about finding the cracks in the system, the weaknesses in her captor, the moments where she could reclaim pieces of herself that he hadn't quite managed to take. And Min-jae, for all his control and power, had revealed something crucial tonight. He valued honesty, kept his promises, and operated by a code that was twisted but consistent. If she could learn that code, maybe she could find a way to navigate this hell without losing herself completely. The next morning, Zara woke to find Min-jae gone and a note on his pillow. Breakfast at 8. Wear the blue dress. We have a social engagement tonight, and I expect you to be perfect. The performance had begun. She was no longer Zara Okonkwo, biochemistry student with dreams of changing the world. She was Min-jae's acquisition, his property, his virgin bride in a deal soaked in blood money and brutality. And somehow, she had to find a way to be that without losing whatever pieces of herself she could still protect. The weeks that followed blurred into a routine that was somehow worse than chaos, because it became normalized. Zara learned to navigate Min-jae's world with the careful precision of someone walking through a minefield. She attended his business dinners dressed in clothes he selected, her role to be beautiful and silent and less specifically addressed. She sat while men discussed violence and profit in languages she was rapidly learning to understand. She returned to his bed when summoned with the mechanical compliance of someone conserving their energy for battles that actually mattered. But she also discovered Min-jae wasn't entirely the monster he pretended to be. He kept his word about her education, ensuring she had everything she needed for her biochemistry courses at Yonsei. Her professors never knew that the brilliant student in their lectures went home to a penthouse prison where her body wasn't her own. When she struggled with organic chemistry, Min-jae hired the best tutor in Seoul without her asking. When she mentioned missing Nigerian food, authentic jollof rice appeared at dinner the next night. These small mercies were almost crueler than pure brutality would have been because they complicated her hatred, made it harder to see him as simply evil. You're adapting well, Miss Chen observed during one of their sessions, 3 weeks into the contract. The older woman studied Zara with something that might have been approval. Mr. Kim is pleased with your progress. Pleased that I've learned to dissociate efficiently? Zara couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her voice. Pleased that you haven't broken. Ms. Chen's expression shifted, became almost sympathetic. He's had arrangements like yours before, Miss Okonkwo. Most girls last 2 weeks before they become hysterical, unusable. You've maintained your dignity and your sanity. That's worth noting. Zara's stomach clenched. What happened to them? The ones who broke. Miss Chen was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. Their contracts were terminated early. Her pause was deliberate, heavy with meaning. Along with their families' protection agreements. Mr. Kim doesn't tolerate weakness, but he also doesn't tolerate waste. If you cannot fulfill the terms of your contract, you become a liability. The message was crystal clear. Survival wasn't just about enduring Min-jae's use of her body, it was about maintaining whatever psychological resilience kept her functional, kept her valuable. Breaking wasn't an option because the cost extended far beyond her own suffering. Her mother, her sisters, they were all depending on her ability to stay whole enough to make it through these 6 months. That night, Min-jae summoned her to his office rather than his bedroom. Zara found him reviewing documents, his expression darker than usual, tension radiating from his shoulders in a way she'd learned to recognize as dangerous. He looked up when she entered, and something in his eyes made her stomach clench with a new kind of fear. "We have a problem," he said without preamble, gesturing for her to sit. "One of my business partners, a man named Young-ho, has expressed interest in you. Specifically, in purchasing your contract from me." Zara's blood turned to ice, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair. "You said no one touches what belongs to you." "You said." "I did. And I meant it." Min-jae stood, pouring himself a drink from the bar with movements that were too controlled, too precise. But Young-ho is persistent and powerful. He controls the entire southern district, has connections in the police and government. Refusing him outright could trigger a war I'd prefer to avoid right now. So I need you to make him lose interest yourself. How am I supposed to do that? Zara's voice came out smaller than she intended. Min-jae drained his glass in one swallow, his jaw tight. By being so thoroughly claimed by me that the idea of touching you becomes synonymous with suicide. We're attending a gala tomorrow night. Young-ho will be there with half the criminal elite of Seoul. You'll stay by my side, respond to my every touch, and make it abundantly clear that you're not just my property, but my willing participant. Can you do that? It was manipulation wrapped in necessity, forcing her to perform affection for the man who'd bought her virginity to protect herself from someone worse. Zara wanted to refuse, to tell him to handle his own criminal politics, but the alternative was being sold to Young-ho, and every instinct screamed that would be infinitely worse than what she currently endured. Yes, she agreed, hating herself for it. I can do that. Something flickered in Min-jae's expression, too quick to identify. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Good. Hannah will prepare you. Wear the emerald dress, the one that makes your skin glow. I want every man in that room to understand exactly what they can never have. The gala was held in one of Seoul's most exclusive hotels, the kind of place where a single night's stay cost more than most people earned in a month. Zara wore the emerald green silk that made her dark skin luminous, her hair styled in elaborate braids woven with gold thread, makeup that transformed her into something that belonged in Min-jae's world of excess and danger. She looked like a queen, and that was precisely the point. The ballroom was everything she'd expected from Min-jae's world, excessive wealth displayed with artistic precision, dangerous people pretending to be civilized, and underneath it all, the constant current of violence barely contained by expensive suits and social niceties. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over faces she recognized from news reports about organized crime, politicians whose corruption was an open secret, businessmen whose fortunes were built on blood and intimidation. Min-jae kept her close, his hand never leaving her body, a constant reminder of ownership that everyone in the room understood. They watched her with hungry eyes, appraising eyes, envious eyes, and Zara played her part perfectly, leaning into Min-jae's touch, smiling at his quiet comments, every gesture conveying that she'd chosen him. Young-ho approached within the first hour, and Zara understood immediately why Min-jae was afraid. The man was in his 50s with eyes that had seen and done terrible things, a smile that promised cruelty, and the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted. He looked at Zara the way a collector might examine a rare artifact, calculating its value and already imagining where it would fit in his collection. Min-jae, he said in Korean, which Zara now understood perfectly thanks to her intensive lessons. Your new acquisition is exquisite. Truly extraordinary. I'd like to make you an offer, a very generous one. She's not for sale, Young-ho. Min-jae's hand settled on Zara's lower back, possessive and warm. At any price. Everything has a price, my friend. You of all people should know that. Young-ho smiled, addressing Zara directly in English that was heavily accented but clear. Wouldn't you prefer an owner who could appreciate you properly? Min-jae has always been wasteful with his toys. I would treasure you, give you everything you could possibly want. Zara felt Min-jae tense beside her, recognized the moment as a test not just for Young-ho but for her, a performance that had to be perfect or the consequences would be dire. She stepped closer to Min-jae, letting her body language convey what words couldn't, that she'd chosen her devil and preferred him to any alternative. "I appreciate your interest," she said carefully, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I'm exactly where I want to be. Min-jae gives me everything I need." The lie tasted like poison, but it achieved its goal. Young-ho's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing with something that looked like genuine anger. Min-jae's hand slid around her waist, pulling her against him in a display of ownership that made several people nearby turn and stare, conversations faltering as they watched the power play unfold. "You heard her," Min-jae said softly, dangerously, his voice carrying just far enough for the watching crowd. "Now walk away before I forget we're in public and remind you what happens to men who covet my possessions." Young-ho's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. My apologies for any offense." But his final look at Zara promised the conversation wasn't over, that he would find another way to get what he wanted. When they returned to the penthouse that night, the tension that had been building all evening finally broke. Min-jae pulled her into his bedroom with an urgency that was different from his usual calculated control, his hands trembling slightly as he removed her dress. "You did well tonight," he said, already working the zipper down with fingers that weren't quite steady. "You protected yourself and protected me. That deserves acknowledgement." Acknowledgement. Zara couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice, even as her dress pulled around her feet. "What could you possibly give me that I'd want?" Min-jae paused, his eyes meeting hers with something that might have been respect if she didn't know better. "Truth. Ask me one question, anything you want to know, and I'll answer honestly. No games, no manipulation, no deflection. One truth for your performance tonight." It was an unexpected offer, and Zara's mind raced through possibilities. She could ask about her father's debt, about the full extent of his criminal empire, about his past and what had made him into this. But only one question truly mattered, the one that had haunted her since the day she signed that contract. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said you could have anyone. Women who would choose this life, who want the money and power and protection. So why go through the trouble of buying a virgin who hates you when there are so many who would come willingly?" Min-jae was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on her shoulders, his expression unreadable in the dim light. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness she'd never heard before, a glimpse of something human beneath the monster. "Because everyone who chooses to be with me wants something," he said simply. "Power, money, status, protection, connections. They see me as a means to an end, a tool to get what they really desire. They perform affection to manipulate me, smile while calculating their next move. But you..." His fingers traced her jawline, almost gentle. "You see me as exactly what I am, a monster who bought you, who owns you, who uses you. There's no pretense between us, no performance of love masking calculation. What we have is honest in a way nothing else in my life can be." He pulled her closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "And because destroying something beautiful and pure is the only way I remember I'm capable of feeling anything at all. You hate me, and that hatred is real, authentic. When I break through your defenses, when I make you respond despite yourself, that's real too. Everything else in my world is transaction and lie. You're the only true thing I have." The honesty was more disturbing than any lie would have been. Zara realized with sickening clarity that she wasn't just property to Min-jae, she was proof of his own monstrosity, a walking reminder that he could still impact someone enough to destroy them. It was a psychological sickness dressed up as a business transaction, and she was trapped in it for 3 more months. But that night, something shifted between them. Not affection, nothing so simple or clean, but a strange understanding. They were both trapped by the contract she'd signed, prisoners of a transaction that had started as survival and become something more complex, more twisted. As weeks turned to months, Zara found herself adapting in ways that terrified her. She learned to predict Min-jae's moods with uncanny accuracy, to navigate his darkness, to find moments of autonomy within her captivity. She excelled in her studies, maintaining her perfect GPA while living a double life that would have destroyed most people. And slowly, against every instinct and principle she'd ever held, she began to understand the man who owned her. Min-jae wasn't just a criminal. He was an orphan who'd built an empire from nothing, sleeping in alleyways as a child, fighting for every scrap of food and dignity. He'd killed his first man at 14 to protect a younger boy from a predator. When she struggled with a particularly difficult concept in her biochemistry course, Min-jae didn't just hire a tutor. He sat with her for 3 hours past midnight, reading her textbook and asking questions that helped her think through the problem differently. When she mentioned missing her mother, he arranged a video call in his office, giving her privacy and an hour of uninterrupted time. These small mercies were almost crueler than pure brutality would have been because they made him human, complicated her hatred, forced her to see him as something more than the monster who'd bought her. 3 months left, Min-jae observed one morning over breakfast, his tone carefully neutral as he set down his coffee cup. "You've exceeded every expectation I had. Your contract includes an option for renewal, did you know that? Have you considered it?" Zara's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, her heart suddenly pounding. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about business, Zara. You know that." He met her eyes across the table, his expression unreadable. "I would double the debt forgiveness, pay for your sister's education all the way through university, and give you significantly more freedom within the arrangement. You'd still be mine, but the terms would be more favorable to you. You could choose your own clothes, have your own social life within reason, pursue your research without restriction." "The answer is no." She set down her cup with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet room. "The day this contract ends, I'm gone. You'll never see me again. I'll finish my degree somewhere else, anywhere else, and forget this ever happened." Something flickered in Min-jae's expression, gone too quickly to identify. Pain, maybe, or disappointment. "As you wish." I had to ask. But the question haunted Zara for days afterward. Not because she was tempted. The idea of voluntarily extending her captivity was obscene, insane. But because it revealed something about Min-jae she hadn't expected, hadn't wanted to acknowledge. He didn't want to let her go. Whatever this arrangement was to him, it had become more than a simple transaction. She'd become important in a way that went beyond ownership, beyond possession. 2 weeks before her contract was set to expire, everything exploded in blood and violence. Zara returned from class to find the penthouse in chaos, Min-jae's men everywhere with weapons drawn, faces grim, the careful veneer of civilization stripped away to reveal the brutal reality beneath. Hannah grabbed her the moment she walked through the door, her usually composed face showing genuine fear. "Young-ho made his move," she said urgently, pulling Zara toward the secure room at the center of the penthouse. "He's declared war. Open war, not the careful political games they usually play. Min-jae's out there now coordinating our defenses, and he needs you safe." "Safe?" Zara's laugh was bitter, sharp. "I've never been safe since I signed that contract. What's different now?" "You don't understand." Hannah's grip tightened painfully on Zara's arm. "Young-ho isn't after territory or money or power. He's after you specifically. He's convinced that possessing you will break Min-jae, prove he's stronger, destroy Min-jae's reputation and power base. If he gets his hands on you," she trailed off, but she didn't need to finish. Zara understood perfectly. She'd become a symbol of Min-jae's power, proof that he could possess something beautiful and keep it. Young-ho wanted to destroy that symbol, violate it, break it, and in doing so, destroy the man himself. The attack came at midnight, shattering the illusion of safety Zara had barely managed to construct. Gunfire exploded through the penthouse windows, glass raining down like deadly snow. Men in black tactical gear poured through the breaches with military precision, their weapons trained on anyone who moved. Zara found herself dragged toward the elevator, a hand clamped brutally over her mouth to silence her screams. Then Min-jae appeared like something from a nightmare, moving through his enemies with lethal grace that was almost beautiful in its efficiency. His gun fired with precise accuracy, each shot finding its target, each movement calculated to maximum effect. He reached her in seconds that felt like hours, killing the man holding her with a shot so close she felt the heat of the muzzle flash against her cheek, and pulled her behind him. "Are you hurt?" His hands ran over her body frantically, checking for injuries with the focused intensity of someone for whom her survival was the only thing that mattered. "Zara, answer me. Are you hurt?" "No, I'm not." The rest of her words were cut off as he pushed her behind him, firing at two more attackers who'd emerged from the smoke and chaos. The battle was brutal and brief, violence stripped of any pretense or elegance. Min-jae's men were better trained, more loyal, fighting on home territory with everything to lose. Within minutes that felt like lifetimes, Young-ho's forces were either dead or retreating, leaving bodies and blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. In the aftermath, as Min-jae's men cleared bodies and assessed damage and secured the perimeter, he pulled her into his bedroom, the only room that hadn't been breached. His hands were shaking as he cupped her face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath, that showed her exactly how close she'd come to losing everything. "I can't protect you here anymore," he said, and for the first time since she'd met him, Min-jae sounded genuinely afraid. "Young-ho won't stop until he has you or one of us is dead. He's gone completely insane, burned every bridge, violated every code. I'm sending you away, somewhere he can't find you." "Away where?" Zara's mind reeled, trying to process the shift, the sudden possibility of freedom. "The contract. Fuck the contract." The words were raw, broken, nothing like the controlled man she'd come to know. "I'd rather lose you than have Young-ho break you, destroy you. There's a safe house in Busan, isolated, defensible. My most trusted men will guard you until this is resolved, until Young-ho is dead or driven out. You'll be free, Zara. No more obligations, no more contract. Just safety, just survival." It was the escape she'd dreamed of for months, the fantasy that had kept her sane through the worst nights, handed to her on a silver platter. Freedom, safety, her family protected and her debt paid. Everything she'd endured would be over, and she could start rebuilding the life Min-jae had taken from her. But looking at Min-jae, seeing genuine fear in eyes that had only ever shown calculation and control, seeing him willing to give up what he'd purchased to keep her safe, Zara realized something that terrified her more than any of Young-ho's men ever could. She didn't want to run. "What if I stay?" The words came out before she could stop them, before rational thought could intervene. "What if I help you end this instead of hiding while you fight?" Min-jae's laugh was sharp, disbelieving, almost desperate. "You hate me. I bought you, used you, owned you, took everything from you. Why would you help me? Why wouldn't you take this chance to escape? Because despite everything you've done to me, despite every violation and every cruelty, you've never lied to me." Zara met his eyes steadily, seeing her reflection in their dark depths. "You've honored every promise, kept every boundary, and just now, you were willing to release me to keep me safe. You're still a monster, Min-jae. But you're my monster, and I'm not letting Young-ho win." The kiss was different from everyone before it, different from the claiming kisses and the possessive kisses and the brutal kisses. This was raw and desperate, two people who'd found humanity in the worst possible place, who'd discovered something real in the midst of transaction and violence. When Min-jae pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously like hope. "If you stay, there's no guarantee you'll survive this. Young-ho is powerful, connected, willing to burn the entire city to get what he wants." "There was never a guarantee," Zara countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Not from the moment I signed that contract. But at least this way, I'm choosing my danger instead of having it chosen for me. I'm choosing to fight instead of run." So she stayed. And together, they planned Young-ho's destruction with the same ruthless efficiency Min-jae applied to everything, but this time with Zara as his partner rather than his possession. She used her intelligence, her education, her outsider perspective to find weaknesses in Young-ho's operation that Min-jae's people had missed. She analyzed his supply chains, identified vulnerabilities in his distribution networks, found the pressure points that could collapse his entire empire. She became not his property but his equal, and in the process, discovered that strength could be found in the strangest places, that survival could transform into something more powerful than simple endurance. The final confrontation came on the last day of her contract, as if fate had a sense of dramatic irony. Young-ho, desperate and cornered after weeks of systematic dismantling of his organization, made one final attempt to take her, storming the penthouse with everything he had left. 50 men armed with military-grade weapons and the fury of a man watching his empire crumble. The battle was savage, overwhelming, the kind of violence that left no room for mercy or hesitation. Zara found herself with a gun in her hands, Min-jae bleeding beside her from a wound in his shoulder, the world narrowing to this single moment of choice. She could run, hide, let the men handle this violence that had nothing to do with her. Or she could fight for the life she'd chosen, the partnership she'd forged from captivity. She pulled the trigger. The recoil shocked through her arms, the sound deafening even through the chaos of battle. Young-ho fell, his eyes wide with surprise that a possession had learned to bite back, that the trophy he'd coveted had become something far more dangerous than he'd imagined. When the smoke cleared and the last of Young-ho's men had either fled or died, Min-jae pulled her close despite his injury, blood soaking them both, painting them in the colors of survival. "Your contract expires in 6 hours," he said, his voice rough with pain and something else, something that sounded almost like fear. "You're free. Completely free. What will you do?" Zara looked at the man she'd hated, feared, and somehow grown to understand in ways that defied explanation. She thought about walking away, starting over, pretending these 6 months had never happened. But she'd learned something crucial in this crucible of violence and survival. Freedom wasn't about geography or contracts, it was about choice. "Renegotiate," she said firmly, her voice carrying a strength that came from surviving what should have broken her. "Because I won't be owned anymore, Min-jae. I won't be property or possession or prize. But I might choose to stay if you learn to ask instead of demand, to request instead of require. If we can build something real instead of something bought." His smile was the most genuine thing she'd ever seen from him, vulnerability and hope mixing with the pain. "I can work with that. I can learn that. I want to learn that." It wasn't a happy ending because happy endings were for fairy tales, and this was something raw, something real. It wasn't even a good ending because good implied moral clarity, and what they had was complicated beyond simple ethics. But it was their ending, built from brutality and survival and the strange understanding that sometimes the most honest relationships are the ones that start with the cruelest truths. Zara would finish her degree with honors, go on to develop treatments that would save lives in communities pharmaceutical companies had abandoned. Min-jae would continue running his empire, but with a partner who challenged him, who refused to let him hide behind his monstrosity, who pushed him toward something that might eventually resemble redemption. Whatever existed between them would be something new, something chosen freely on both sides, something that defied every rule about how people were supposed to heal from trauma. Because sometimes survival isn't about escaping the monster. Sometimes it's about learning which monsters are capable of change, which ones might become something better if someone believes they can be, which ones deserve the chance to prove that even darkness can learn to carry light. And Zara had learned to tell the difference. 6 months after her contract ended, she stood in Min-jae's office, not as his possession, but as his equal, reviewing plans for a foundation that would fund medical research in underserved communities. He'd liquidated one of his more profitable, but morally questionable ventures to fund it, his first step toward the redemption she'd insisted was possible. "You're changing me," he said quietly, watching her work with an expression that was still learning how to be soft. "No," Zara corrected, looking up to meet his eyes. "You're changing yourself. I'm just showing you that it's possible. That you're more than what you were forced to become." It was a long road ahead, filled with complications and setbacks and moments where the old Min-jae would surface with all his calculated cruelty. But Zara had survived 6 months as his property. She could survive a lifetime as his partner, his conscience, his proof that even monsters could learn to be human. Hit that like button if you think Zara made the right choice, or if you think she's lost in Stockholm Syndrome. Drop a comment with your honest thoughts, because I genuinely want to know what you think about this ending. And subscribe because this universe has so many more complicated stories to tell about love and survival and the impossible choices we make to protect the people we care about. Did she find freedom in captivity or just learn to love her cage? Only time will tell, and maybe that's the most honest answer of all. I'll see you in the next one.